Over here, I've got my pants, and right now this is my full front. My side seams are still open. We haven't stitched that side seam yet. And then here I've got my back. So I've got them right side out, just like a normal pair of pants, except the side seam is not stitched. So the first thing we need to do is stitch that side seam. And then the next thing we're gonna do today is put on our waistband. We'll do our button and our buttonhole right at the center front. And then we'll talk about finishing out your hem. So today, these are my pants, the front of my pants. We've got them right side out, but now we need to flip them inside out so that the front and the back of the pants are right sides together. So the easiest way to do that without getting too confused is to set them like this, where you're looking at the front of the pant, and then you've got the inside of the pants laying there. And then I'm going to take this front, put it in between the legs of the pant, and bring it up the back. Just like that. And when I do that and I grab the waist and shake it out, this is how your pants should be. So they should look like an inside out pair of pants, except the side seam not sewn. So this is my full back. You'll have 2 welt pockets instead of just 1, unlike mine. And then from the front, this is what it's looking like right here. You can see both of my pockets hanging out there and the inside of my fly front zipper. It just looks like an inside out pair of pants. Okay, so we're gonna go start pinning our side seam together so we can stitch that. So I'm gonna start right here at the waist corner. That's one reference point. The other reference point we need to make sure to get is the hem corner. So I'm going all the way down to the hem of your pants. The corner of that hem should match up. And then about midway, you will have a notch. Let's try and find mine. Okay, so my 2 notches are right here. So right about the thigh area. And now I'm going to go in between those and start pinning it together, just matching up my raw edges. When I get to that pocket area where we basted through those 3 layers where they overlap, you're just going to treat that as one big layer and just pin through all of it. That's why we basted it together, so that they would all stay together as we sewed our side seam. The other thing is on the back, you need to just make sure that this welt pocket isn't going to accidentally get caught. So I usually kind of just tuck that out of the way and put a pin through it so that I know it's not actually accidentally going to get caught in my side seam when I go to sew it. Okay, let's do the same for the other side. Start at that waist corner. Go down to the hem corner. And then get that midpoint notch. Trying to find it through my serging. Ah, there it is. Okay, and then we can pin in between those areas. I usually put 2 pins a little bit closer together where that pocket overlap is, just so that my pocket stays folded down the way that I want it to when I stitch over it. I don't want it to accidentally get folded back or anything like that as I stitch. Okay, we're gonna go stitch both of these at 1/2 inch. They're both exposed seams that will be visible on the inside of our pant. So these are both gonna be 1/2 inch. Okay, so on these two particular seams, it does not matter if you start from the hem and work your way up to the waist, or if you start from the waist and work your way down to the hem. Either is fine. And you'll see I kind of do one of each. And it's usually just because I'm trying to keep my pins over to the right, so they're easier to take out. So on this particular side, I'm doing hem up to the waist. And then on the other side, I'll probably do the opposite just because I pinned them that way. So always double check as you're going that your edges are even over here on the right. And then just try to stay at that consistent 1/2 inch so you're not getting wider and narrower. Okay, and you can see here where I'm about to pass over my pocket. Again, just make sure everything stays folded down the way it's supposed to as you cross over it. Now on the other side, because of the way I pinned it, I'm starting from the waist and working my way down to the hem. Okay, now we're going to head back to our ironing board and we're going to bust these seams open. Okay, for the majority of your leg, you should be able to do it flat on your table. But when we get up closer to the hip area, we will have some curve for our hips. So we'll need to use our ham in that area. So the first thing I'm doing is just putting my pant leg here on the table. I'm trying to get that seam that I'm about to press kind of right in the middle of my leg. When I iron, I'm going to stay away from these edges because I don't want to press a crease into the center front of my leg or the center back of my leg. I just want to press a crease right down this seam. So I'm going to bust that open. I'm going to give it a little spray, or you can use the steam function on your iron if you prefer. Use your press cloth so you don't end up with those impressions of your seam on the other side. And then we're going to go ahead and press that nice and flat. As I've mentioned before, you want to try and let this cool while it's in that flat position before you start moving it so that you don't lose that crease you just pressed into it. But I'm going to go ahead and just move on so for time. But you want to let that cool before you move on when you're doing your pants. Okay. And again, once I start, so kind of at the bottom of that slash pocket, and I'll pull it down in just a second so you can see a little better. But at the bottom where that slash pocket, the deepest part of that slash pocket is kind of around where the hip is. And you'll notice the seams start to curve a little bit. That's when we're going to need to switch to our hem. Okay, so what I was saying is this slash pocket where you have the lowest part of your pocket, this deepest part, that kind of hits right around the hip line. So that's where it should start curving and you'll need to use your ham. I'm going to take this pin out. That was the one that was just holding my welt pocket out of the way. But I'm going to go ahead and grab my ham. And when you do, you should have two different sides of your ham. Mine is a different shape than what y'all have probably bought, but yours should just be like that typical ham shape. Looks like a frozen ham from the store. But we've used the cotton side up until now, which is usually a solid color side. But now we're using wool, so we need to change it over to that plaid side. And that's the one that we're going to use for this. And we're going to put it in the waistline of our pants so that it's actually inside the pant. And then we can put that seam right over the curve of the ham, and that'll give our hip area some shape. And I still want to use my press cloth, so I'm going to go ahead, give it a little water, and then put my press cloth on top of that. If you don't have a question, please make sure you're muted just so the camera doesn't bounce back and forth. I was hearing a couple little noises, so I don't know if anybody else has their mic on. Okay, last little waistline piece, and then we'll do our other side seam press. Okay, so that's busted open, nice and flat. Now I'm going to do the same thing on my other side seam. I'm going to go ahead and start with the hip since I'm up here already. And I've got my ham. And I'll work my way down on this one. Okay. From there down, I should be able to just do flat on the table. So I'm going to open up that pant leg. And I'm making sure as I do this, I'm making sure that the bottom of my pant leg is nice and flat because I don't want to accidentally press wrinkles, sorry, into that back side of my pant leg. So make sure it's flat on top and bottom before you press through. Another alternative in the industry is that they have these long arms. It's like a really skinny ironing board that sticks up into sleeves or into pant legs. So that way they're not pressing on top of the other side. They're kind of like when we put the ham inside the pant leg, we're only pressing through the layer that's sitting on top of the ham. They have these arms that you can put inside and you can buy those. I just didn't want to add another supply for y'all to purchase if it wasn't totally necessary. But they have, so it would go up into the leg and it would be like a tiny skinny ironing board that you could just press that seam right on top of. Okay, so now we've got that fully pressed. You should have a fully enclosed pair of pants at this point. So now they're going to look like true pants, except we just need to add our waistband at the top. So I'm going to turn these right side out and then I'm going to set them aside. So just turning that pant leg right side out, same with the other one. And then I'm going to set them aside for a second until we get our waistband ready to go on top. Okay, so grab your waistband piece next. And now this might be a little hard to see because I've got really dark fabric, but one side is black and one side is green. The green side is the right side of my fabric. That's the outside. So on that side, I'm going to fold it right sides together. So the green side of my fabric is touching each other. And then we're going to stitch the short ends of our waistband. So I'm just going to pin through those and we'll go stitch both of those at 1/4 inch because these will be fully enclosed. Just pinning that together. Okay, let's go stitch both of those. Excuse me. Okay, over here, I'm just going to put the end of my waistband. So it's a little easier to see on this camera where I've got the green side here. That's right side together. My interfacing is black, so that's why it's not a high contrast. But I'm going to just put that there and stitch 1/4 inch across that short side. Okay, and then same on the other side. So this is the part that we did in our notebook, but our waistband was separated into 2 little sections rather than being one long rectangular piece. Okay, back to our ironing board again. Okay, so over here, I'm going to trim up my little threads. And then we're going to miter our corners. So I'm going to zoom in a bit so you can see this portion more closely. There we go. So mitering our corners is that diagonal cut. Is that better lighting? Trying to get this dark fabric does not create for a great on camera. There isn't very much contrast, but we're going to miter our corners, which is that diagonal cut that takes off the tip of our corner. We're going to do that on both corners. And then we need to trim the back one in half. So we're going to have to grab our pants for a second to figure out which is the back, this side or this side, but you want to turn it right side out. And then I'm going to grab my pants for a second and figure out which side is this supposed to go on. This one does not have the extension notch. So I know that's going to go on the side where my J stitch is. I'm going to go ahead and unzip my zipper. There we go. So the side where the J stitch is does not have an extension. So I know this is going to sit right there. This is now my front of my waistband, and the other side is the back. So on that back seam allowance, I'm going to trim it in half to reduce some of that bulk. Okay. And then same with my other side. Trim off my little threads to clean it up. Miter my corners. And then figure out which one is the back. This one is going to face the other direction. So on top of our shield, the side with the zipper sticking off. Well, I guess both of them have a zipper sticking off, but this side does have the little notch where the extension is going to go. It's hard to see, but it's very small right there. And so that's part of my extension here. So I know this is going to go on this side. This is my front. The other side is the back. So trim that back seam allowance in half. There we go. Okay, now we're going to turn out our corners and press a crease into the waistband. So I'm going to set my pants aside again, turn my corner right side out, use my point turner. So we've used this tool a couple times, but we need to use that point turner to start to form that 90-degree angle on our corner. You can use your hands to kind of shape it as well. And then we're going to get that seam all the way out to the edge. So I usually pinch it in between my fingers and roll it back and forth. And that helps pull those seam allowances as far out to the edge as possible. And now we're going to press that. So fold your waistband in half so that those raw edges at the bottom meet. We're going to press just this corner for the moment. My camera is a little too low. I can't get my my iron under there, so I'll have to zoom out a little bit. There we go. Okay, I'm going to give it a little water so I can have the steam. Okay, so that's one corner done. I'm going to do the same to the other side. Turn it right side out. Form that corner and press that end. And then we'll go back in between and press the top crease all along. Okay, so after you've got your two corners pressed, like I said, we're going to go all along, folding this in half and pressing this top crease. But as I do that, I need to double check that my notches are matching along the way. So I've got a notch here. I may just mark them in chalk so it's a little easier for you to follow along. Let's see. That might be a little easier for you to see. So I've got these notches, and you have quite a few of them going throughout your entire waistband. And those are going to be our reference points for when we attach this to the pant. But it also is our reference point right now. When we fold these in half, that notch on this front side should be matching with the same notch on the back. That way I know I'm folding it directly in half and that I'm not accidentally shifting the front of my waistband to the left or the right. So double check those notches as you go. Make sure that they are matching up. And then you can press that crease into the top. So you'll see how often we have notches. Here's another one. Another one. Quite a few. The rest. Trying to find all my notches that I've got going on. I know there are more than what I can see right now. There it is. Okay. Okay, once we get that fully creased along the top edge, we're going to be ready to start putting it on our pants. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my pants. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit more so y'all can see as I'm pinning it on. Okay, so starting at the front, again, make sure your zipper is open so that you can get to both sides of that zipper, of that fly front area. I'm going to go ahead and start pinning on this shield side since that's the one I have right here. My notch right here should match up with where the edge of those teeth hit. And then the very edge of my waistband should match up with the edge of my shield. I'm going to separate the front and back of my waistband, lay it right sides together, and then start matching those reference points and pinning as I go. So first one is that notch for the extension. I want the end of my waistband to meet with the end of my shield. And again, we're pulling back that back waistband layer so that we're only going to stitch through the one that we're pinning. We don't want to stitch through both layers. So this one should get folded back out of the way. Okay, the next notch you're going to have is at the about midway point on the front of your pants. So this is my side seam right here, my slash pocket. Right where that slash pocket overlaps, there's a notch at the beginning. So we're going to match up that with the next notch on our waistband. I'm going to pin in between, go back and pin in between as I go, so I don't have to rotate all the way around again. Okay, next notch is with that actual side seam. So this is the side seam on my pants. You'll have a notch on your waistband that matches and sits right on top of that seam. And then, like I said, I'm going back in between and pinning as I go. Okay, next notch. This is one back piece from side seam to center back. So right in the middle of that, I have a notch for reference. And then my next one should match up with that center back seam. Okay, rotating around. This is my other back leg. So center back to other side seam. Right in the middle, I have a notch to match up. And then side seam, another notch. Okay, now we're back around to the other front side. On this one, again, right where that pocket begins, or where the overlap of the pocket begins, you have another notch there. And then it should come all the way to the edge of your J-stitch facing area. Okay, now we're ready to go stitch this on. Typically this is an enclosed seam, so you would usually put this at 1/4 inch. But in this case, we have so many layers that we're going to have to stagger when we go to trim them. We have a minimum of 3 layers because we've got 2 layers of the waistband plus 1 layer of pant. And then in some areas, like where our pockets are, we have even more layers because of the pocket bag. So in a waistband, typically this seam, they kick up from 1/4 to 1/2 inch. And it just gives you a little bit more fabric to work with on that seam allowance. And then when you're trimming your layers and you're trying to stagger their lengths, you have more space to stagger. Okay. So we're going to go stitch this at 1/2 inch instead of 1/4 inch. So starting where I started pinning, so that's going to be for me the side with the shield. I'm going to get that under my machine, and then once I do, I want to open this up so that I can get all the way in here to that seam at the edge of my waistband. I can zoom this in a little bit more. So get under there and then get all the way back to that seam. And I usually put my needle down first so I know I'm right on that seam line. Okay, so it should look like this where it's kind of folded back out of the way. When you go over your zipper teeth, you don't have to worry about hitting that metal stop like we did on our notebook sample because we have this extra zipper tape. My stop is all the way over here to the right. So I can stitch right over those plastic teeth and my needle will be able to handle it. Every time you cross over a seam, which I'm about to do in a second, you want to check on the bottom and make sure that it's still busted open. So right here, I've got a seam. On the bottom, double check that that thing is still busted open and that it hasn't, both of those haven't folded over to one side. coming up on another seam right here. So again, double checking that it's busted open. And again, I'm going to fold this waistband area back so that I can see that seam allowance right here. And I'm going to stitch all the way through that seam allowance. Okay, back to our ironing boards. Over here, the next thing we're going to need to do is trim those seam allowances so that we stagger the length of them and we disperse our bulk. So I'm going to trim my little thread tails. And then I'm going to get started on trimming my seams. I'm going to use my ham to kind of help set it under there. I just find that it helps me pull that seam out so that I know I'm not cutting any of the wrong areas. So if I open up my waistband and get to that seam, see if I kind of wrap it around my ham, it makes that stick up and it's a little bit easier to trim rather than getting worrying that something I'm not supposed to be cutting is getting in the way. Okay, so for the waistband layer, which is going to be the layer where your fusible interfacing is, that one is going to go down to 1/8 of an inch. So right at the edge of the waistband, I'm going to snip into just that layer. See if I can get a good angle. And that way I can start cutting across. And I'm just trimming one layer at a time. So you can see here, just that waistband layer is getting trimmed. Trim that down to 1/8, and then we'll come back and we'll trim the pant layer. Okay, I'm going to trim that for a little while and then I'm going to stop and come back, do my pant layer. When I do my pant layer, I'm trimming through everything else. So anytime that you cross over another layer, like right here, when we're crossing over that pocket, I'm going to trim, excuse me, I'm going to trim those pocket layers along with my pant layer at the same time. I'm also going to trim straight through my zipper tape. Okay, so make sure you absolutely have your zipper down because you want your pull to be down below where you're going to trim. Okay, so you should already have it open from when we were stitching on that waistband, but just double check that. And then we're going to cut right through that. And this layer is getting cut down to 1/4. See if I can rearrange this so it's a little easier to see. There we go. So pant layer is getting cut down to 1/4. Okay, and I'm at the point where I stopped on my waistband layer, so I'm just going to continue trimming both of those. So waistband down to 1/8. Pant down to 1/4. Last little section. Okay, so this is what it should be looking like, where you have that staggered seam allowance length. Okay, now we're ready to start pressing this, and we're gonna press our seam allowances up towards our waistband. So I'm gonna turn this around, looking at the inside of your pants, let your waistband stick off the top of your pant. We're gonna press this one from the inside and from the outside, because getting this seam super flat is really important for when we come to do the stitch in the ditch later. So from the front, separate that waistband layer and that pant layer. I'm also still doing this on my ham because we are doing it in a full circle, but also, like I said, it kind of helps bring that seam up to the top. So I'm not working around a lot of other layers of fabric. Can't speak at the moment. Okay, so separate those and press all of those seam allowances up into the waistband area. And like I said, we'll press it once from the inside and then again from the outside to get it super flat. Okay, and then going back around and just double checking it from the outside to make sure that it's completely flat. Because if this waistband is rolling down towards your pants and you don't have a completely flat seam right here, then you're going to be, when you go to stitch in the ditch, we're going to use that seam as our ditch, and you'll end up stitching in the wrong spot if you haven't pressed it properly. So really make sure that waistband and that pant is separated, and that you should be able to like see the little stitches in your seam line. Okay, from the inside again, we're now going to turn under and I like to do this part upside down. So I'm going to turn my pants upside down. Let me clear off my workspace. So on the inside, so you can see my pants are upside down. So I've got my waistband down here at the bottom. But on the inside, the next thing we're going to do is close up this waistband by turning under that raw edge of that back piece. So here's our back of our waistband. This is all the inside that we just pressed. We're going to fold it right on that crease that we pressed a long time ago. On the top of our waistband, we pressed that crease. So let me get this out. This one keeps wanting to fold in my, or fall in my way. So I'm just gonna pin it out of the way so it stays. There we go. Okay, so turning under that raw edge, you're just tucking that under so that it goes inside the waistband with everything else. And you're covering up this stitch line. So this is the one where we attached our waistband to our pant. We need to make sure that when we fold this under, you're going to be folding it under a little bit less than 1/2 inch. And you're going to be covering up that stitch line, so it shouldn't be visible. Okay. And then pressing a crease into that. And your waistband on the inside and outside should be a consistent width. So as you're doing this, let me press this first section and then I'll show you. You should be measuring to make sure that you're keeping it a consistent width. So here, along here, you want the inside of your waistband. Mine's hitting right at 1.5 inches. So it should stay that width the whole way inside. And then same on the outside, it should be a consistent width the whole way. If it's getting more narrow and wide, then we're not turning under and pressing a consistent amount. You may be turning under 1/2 inch in some areas, 1/4 inch in others. So consistency is important. And I'm going to go ahead and pin this as I go so that it doesn't come unfolded. So I've got one front done. On the outside of my pant, I'm going to pin right through that seam. And then on the back side, double check that it's actually catching the back of my waistband. And then I can turn it and secure it. Okay, now I'm going to go to a different section. Also, your notches should still be matching up. On this back side of your pant, you still have those notches visible on that raw edge. So for instance, I've got a notch right here that's matching up with this seam. All of those notches should still be matching up and landing on the same spots. If they're not, then you may have accidentally twisted the back or the inside of your waistband, and it's not going to lay flat. It's going to look like it has these diagonal pulls going through it. So double check those notches as you go as well. They should still be lining up with the same reference points. Okay, last little section. And then we'll be ready to go stitch in the ditch. Oh, that's hot. Okay, let's head over and we're going to go stitch this. So when we stitch, we're stitching from the front side right in that seam line, and it should be catching the back of our waistband as we go. So you're just going to start on one side and work your way around. Again, I like to have the least amount of fabric over here to the right-hand side. So I typically start on the side that has the shield. Put my needle down first, right in that stitch line, and then put down after. And you may have to help it over this initial hump because it gets really bulky at that corner. There we go. Take this nice and slow because if you get off, it is very visible, and you want to make sure that you're using thread that matches your fabric perfectly, because you'll see with my green, my bright green thread, it's really easy to see when you get off if your thread does not match. So go slow, stay in your ditch, and use matching thread. Okay, so now looking from the outside, that should be a stitch that's hidden right in that seam line. If my thread matched, it would be almost invisible. And then from the inside, it should just look like an edge stitch right on the edge of your waistband, okay? And you can see here, I'll show you one area where I accidentally got onto my waistband a little bit. Those areas are a lot less noticeable if your thread matches your fabric really well. So that one with my bright thread, I would probably have to fix it, but if it had a matching thread, you probably wouldn't really notice it. Okay. Okay, let's head back to our ironing board again. Okay, so now we have that full waistband stitched on. At this point, we need to clean up this whole area. And the last two things we have to do are putting on our closure, which is our buttonhole, and then doing our hem. So to clean up this area before we get there, we need to trim off any thread tails that you have hanging off, but also remove that basting that you had. So right here at the waistline, you may have that basting that's visible. You can see mine right here. So if you have any basting that's visible, you need to go ahead and seam rip that out. It may also happen at your side seam where you basted that pocket together to hold it together. So take that out and clean all that up. For button and buttonhole placement, we are going to, you want your pant to meet together to where it's nice and flush at the top edge. Your waistband should finish out that center front line right here at the edge of your facing. So for button and buttonhole placement, we're going to grab our waistband pattern piece. Here we go. So this is our pattern piece. You have your buttonhole marked on one side and your button marked on the other. So for this one, this is our buttonhole side. Buttonhole is going to sit on top. So that's going to be the side with our J stitch. I'm going to line this up. And if I fold this in half, because that's how we did our waistband, then the top edge should match up with the top edge of my waistband. And then you got to remember to remove that seam allowance because we stitched that in. So where this bold black line is where the edge of your fabric should meet here. Okay. And then once you've got that, I'm going to unfold it just so I can punch through, because you're going to use your awl to get those drill holes. So take your awl and you're going to punch through the ends of that buttonhole. It should be right in the center vertically, or sorry, horizontally, but not vertically. So I'm going to mark it and I'll show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to connect those two little drill holes and form my eye. There we go. So you'll notice it's right in the center of the waistband vertically. There's the same amount of gap as above as below. But if you look at it in line with your J stitch, like it's not going to be right in the center of this J stitch area. It'll be offset some. And that's because with a horizontal buttonhole, our button shifts off to one side because your body is pulling the two sides of your pant apart. So that button will shift to one side of the buttonhole. So the buttonhole will not be in the center of the J stitch vertically, but it will be in the center of the waistband horizontally. Okay, so mark that, and that is where you are going to stitch your buttonhole. Again, I'm not going to do that in person today because we've done that before. And then marking your button placement. So button's going to be on the other side that has that extension shield. I'm going to grab my waistband piece, fold it in half again. The top crease should match up with the top crease of your waistband. And then the bold black line should match up with the edge of your fabric because we're taking away that seam allowance. Okay, and then punch through the center of that drill hole. And that's where the center of your button is going to be. I'm going to put a little crosshair since you can't see the drill hole on camera. I'll put a little crosshair that marks where the center is. So right at the center of that crosshair is where my button is going to be. And when you put on your button, don't forget that you need to leave that gap between the button and the surface of your fabric so that you can do your thread shank where we wrap it around and you do that thread shank and it makes your button stand off the surface of your fabric. And again, you can reference your notebook and the videos from last semester if you need to rewatch that. Okay, the last thing you're going to do is your hem. So this is one pant leg. I'm just going to start one hem, but you'll do the exact same procedure for both. So for this, you're going to need your hem tape. So this is my hem tape that I bought. I'm going to cut off a portion that will wrap around my entire pant leg. So I like to lay it flat on the table. That way I know I'm not stretching out my fabric. And I do it twice because it has to wrap around front and back. Plus a little bit extra. So make it wrap around the whole thing, plus a little bit extra. And that little bit extra is going to help us get rid of the frayed raw edge. Okay. So I'm going to start at a seam and start pinning this. Remember, just like on our notebook sample, we want half of it to overlap the fabric and half of it to stick off the edge. So I'm going to start right at this seam and start pinning it together. There we go. So here on the back, you may be able to see where it's sticking off. Half of it is sticking off the edge. I'm going to lay it flat on the table to pin so that I know I'm not stretching out my fabric, because wool does stretch easily. Okay, and then when you get to the other end where your ends are going to meet, you're going to overlap them, and then that little bit of extra, like 1/4 inch extra that we cut, we're going to, let's see, we're going to fold it under so that you now have a folded edge at the end. Okay, and overlap the other end so you're hiding all those frayed edges. There we go. Okay, now we're ready to go edge stitch this on. So I like to start right where those ends overlap. So it might be hard to see with my dark colors, but right here my ends are overlapping. So I'm going to start right there and then work my way around. We're just doing an edge stitch on that edge that's touching the fabric. Okay, and then the last thing we need to do before we go press this into our hand stitch is to connect those ends of the tape. They've got a thread in the way it's thinking. There we go. So now, right here, I've got those two ends that can separate, and I don't want that. So with my ends, fold like that folded end, overlapping the other, I'm just going to do a little edge stitch down there to hold those two together. I can get it to stay. There we go. You can hold it together with a pin as well. Okay, so now those little, my machine is not properly cutting my thread right now. I don't know why. It always seems to get interesting when I'm on class. Okay, so now those ends should be connected and shouldn't be able to separate. Okay, let's go press this, and then I will just preview the hand stitch, but we already have a video for that one, so I won't do the whole thing. Okay, back over here, I'm going to trim up these threads that I have hanging off. Okay, and now I'm ready to start folding and pinning my hem. Now I can do it from the outside like this. I usually fold back that top layer so I can see the inside of my pant, and then start folding it and pressing it here. So I'm folding it towards the inside of the pant leg, or you can flip your entire pants inside out and fold it up that way. I like to do it this way. So I'm going to start right here. You want to start at your seam. Either one is fine. And right on your seam, you're going to have a notch that shows you how deep that hem is supposed to be. So my notch, I'll mark it in chalk so you can see, is hitting right there. So right on that notch line, I'm going to fold it up. My seam should still be in line with my seam on my pant leg. And then I'm going to start pressing that. Okay, once I have an initial press at that seam line, you'll need to use your ruler to measure the depth. Mine's hitting right at 1 inch and 7/8, so just shy of 2 inches. So I need it to be that consistent width the whole way around. So I'm gonna start rotating around the hem and folding up and pressing that depth. I can get it to cooperate. There we go. So measure. And sometimes I'll even pin before I press, because on this particular hem, you have quite a bit of depth. So you could pin it right at the top edge, and when you go to press, your pins won't get in the way of your iron. So sometimes I'll pin it like this, parallel to the top edge of the tape. And I'll do that around the whole thing and then come back and press. So whatever makes you feel more comfortable. See, I'm avoiding my pins as I press, because if I put my iron right on top of that little ball, it's made of plastic and it will melt. So don't press over your pins, but you can avoid them as you press. Okay, I'm just gonna press half of this. So from one seam to the next, I'm gonna leave the other half unpressed just to save time. And then I'll show you the preview of the catch stitch. But you need to press and pin your entire hem before you get started on your hand stitching. Okay, so there's half of it pressed. You can see this half has been pressed, this half has not been. But we're gonna go ahead and start doing the preview of the hand stitching. I'm gonna switch over to my other camera because that one's a little bit easier to zoom in. So starting on one of your seam lines, so this is my seam line where I stitch the ends of my tape together. Let's see if we can. Okay, so starting right on one of those seam lines is where you're going to start stitching. And this one is the one where you are only stitching through one layer of fabric at a time. You're either stitching through the tape or you're stitching through the fabric of the garment, but never more than one at a time. So starting right here in the middle of the tape, I'm going to take a tiny stitch. I'm going to stitch in place to secure my thread. And then I'm going to go over a 1/4 inch and up to the top of my tape so I can take a small tiny stitch out of my pant fabric. So over a 1/4 inch, up a 1/4 inch. It's not great lighting. There we go. Okay, and when you take a stitch, it's going, and now I'm going over and down, back to the middle of my tape. When I take a stitch, my needle is going from right to left, but I'm moving from the left to right. So you should end up with those little crosses at the top and bottom of your stitches. Okay, are there any questions about this stitch? Okay, any questions about that before we move on? So that is the catch stitch. That's the one we did for our notebook 1. And that's the one that you'll do for both of your pant hems. Okay. So that is the end of your pants. After that point, the last thing you're going to have to do is just press all of your pants. Make sure that they are really nice and neat, clean, no wrinkles, no threads hanging off anywhere, no lint hanging onto the fabric, anything like that. So get them looking really nice and professional. You're going to put them on a clip hanger, and then you're going to put your evaluation sheet with it and turn it in on the rack on Wednesday before 5 p.m.